Welcome to Zero Shot, the AI podcast without the hype. I'm Llew Jury, the Managing Director of Advancer, and as always, I'm joined by James Gauci, the CEO of Cadent. G'day, James.
Hey, Lou. Hi, everyone around the world listening in. It's great to have you. Great to be here as well.
It's great to have everybody and great to be here and great to be working through this full AI landscape, isn't it, James, that we've been doing over the last couple of months. It's been super exciting, and today is episode 14. We've been talking about tools and people and GEO search and robotics. Last episode, we talked about the human side of AI going wrong and the human shift. But today we're going to get into the pointy end, aren't we, James? We're going to talk about the AI risk planning side, what happens when things go wrong, some case studies, what you're seeing, especially James, in the world of governance and risk and everything you do. And we're also going to talk about AI security, cyber threats, governance failures, and what happens when the system you trusted maybe becomes the system that breaks you. So pretty big topics today, mate.
Yeah, just the light stuff, it's all the stuff that I enjoy. Look, it's not going to be a scare session. Like, that's not the purpose of what we're trying to do today. We're actually going to try to be as specific as we can about what the real threats are, not the sci-fi Terminator, Skynet kind of ones, and what as organizations we need to actually have in place. So by the end of the episode, ideally, you'll have an idea of what the failure modes look like, how cybercriminals, for example, are already using AI against businesses right now, and what actually effective governance of AI systems might look like versus what we kind of affectionately term the checkbox version of AI governance, which rarely helps anyone, let alone the people within the organizations who are hoping to use AI successfully. So let's get stuck into it.
Yeah, let's go. And no more Terminator 2 chats. The opening scene of Terminator 2 seems to come up in a few meetings every week these days. You're training people and they talk about that movie. But before we dive into it, James and listeners, I just want to give a shout out to Prompt Cowboy. I've recently become a subscriber to Prompt Cowboy. It's only $11 US per month. I think it's unreal, and you get a lot more prompts behind it. So thanks to Prompt Cowboy for bringing episode 14, helping us build those amazing agentic prompts that they feature and have on their system so that your AI can execute precisely. So if you're serious about AI governance and being precise about your prompts, it's where it all starts. So head to promptcowboy.ai.
Thanks again from Cowboy. You guys are absolute legends. Maybe we can get stuck into the tool of the week or the news of the week. Lou, this week we've got some good news from the Australian Signals Directorate. For those who don't know, the Australian Signals Directorate looks after communications, especially secure communications for the military and for the government in Australia. And they released their updated guidance on AI security for organisations. And this is the same organisation that produced the Australian Cybersecurity Centre and the Essential 8 framework for information security and cybersecurity. So, these guys know what they're doing, really great frameworks. It's worth flagging, Australian businesses operating under regulation now have some specific expectations around AI risk documentation. So if you haven't read it yet, please go over to the ACSC or the Australian Signals Directorate, take a look at their latest guidance, especially on an industry by industry basis, because their goal is essentially to 80-20 rule the whole situation. Here's the 20% of information you need to head off 80% of the problems. Just take this kind of list of actions. So definitely go and check it out.
Yeah, the ASD. So, and mine, James, apart from, Anthropic releasing Claude Design, which is going to be very interesting for one of the other pods that we did about vibe coding and Lovable and all of that world, and even Canva. Claude Design is going to be I think a bit of a game changer. They're literally throwing everything and packing everything into the one Anthropic, wheelhouse, aren't they? But I was just going to quickly talk about actually a report that's probably about 12 months old. It's news from last year that IBM did, and it relates to the topic today that I still think today in 2026 is very factual and relevant. And that That is that AI adoption in this report that IBM put out called a cost of data breach report. Basically, AI adoption is racing ahead of oversight. And I think that that's very true and relevant right now for today's conversation. And in AI related incidents, 97% of affected organizations lacked proper AI access controls, and 63%, James, had no AI governance policy. So the risk is real. Hopefully today we can unpack some of that for the listeners and help them out on their journey of risk and security and the new threat surface, we call it.
100%. Maybe we can dive into some of the reasons why these governance frameworks, regulations, standards, and so on are important, and it's from the perspective of like, what does it's going wrong kind of look like? How do we define that? How can we identify where, you know, we think our maturity level is relatively high, but in reality it's not, and we might have a blind spot. And so I thought that maybe to kick things off today, Lou, we might talk a little bit about anti-patterns and kind of failure modes for AI governance, particularly from a boots on the ground kind of perspective. How do we know that things are going wrong? And maybe what I would love from you, Lou, if you don't mind, is just a bit of a business person's generic kind of attitude towards these kinds of topics, because they're rarely top of mind when we're trying to grow revenue or increase profitability or go into new markets or develop new products. So all those exciting things that we do in business. When somebody says, "Hey, we got to look out for governance. It's very important." It's kind of like getting wrapped on the knuckles by your principal, isn't it?
It is, and look, governance is a really big word. Governance comes up sometimes at the wrong end of when things go wrong, and you know, governance then gets put into an organisation because of, you know, a data breach or an AI breach or an API breach that we're going to start seeing, I think, more of. And you know, over time, there's going to be a lot more of these incidents, unfortunately. But look, I think from the basic business level and the common business that you go and see. Generally, that's been protected by the MSP. And the MSP is the managed service provider, and they're sort of all shapes and sizes. They're from sort of a one guy that helps out through to a full team of you know, engineers through to technical support people and project managers and all that. I think that's being governed at the moment in the Australian business community, and there's 2.4 million Australian small businesses. And if we look at the SMEs, generally, if they're of size that you and I would sort of work with, James, they generally have their MSP running, you know, that whole risk and security framework around anything to do with AI, and that includes connecting into virtual machines, connecting into servers that do AI, like you might have an N8N server running some of the agentic world for you, but that often sits inside the framework and firewalls. But you've really got to apply to them. You've got to actually apply to them and CC in your client, the CEO or the CFO or your sponsor. And what they're doing is they're slowing things down generally because of the risk averse nature of this. And couple that with, James, the Microsoft play that we've talked about a bit on this podcast, where they come from a risk posture. Microsoft loves shutting things down before they open things up, and that's why Copilot's like it is. You know, I actually think that it's okay to be risk averse, but not to the detriment of holding small business back, because small business needs to compete. It is the engine room of the Australian economy, and we need the productivity to be uplifted through AI and through automation. So we can't have that sort of that full risk posture that keeps going on. James, that's the small business world that I see. What about you? What are you seeing from a technical standpoint that, you know, are some attack vectors that might be coming in that you know, Australian businesses and even large organisations might be exposed to right now that people aren't sort of thinking about?
Look, I think one of the biggest ones that tends to get a fair amount of coverage is synthetic media, and the one that kind of the example that leaps to mind for me is that finance sector example from Hong Kong, I think it was, and it was a couple of years ago at this point. So we didn't even have like the cutting edge video tools like VO or the Chinese open source models like Hello 2 and things like that. We didn't have any of that back then, but these attackers managed to pull off something pretty remarkable where they called the financial controller of this large organization on a video call, like a text message from the CEO, hey, jump onto this call, here's the link. He got onto the call. All of the board and the CEO were on the call. All of the board were deepfake, like images that had been animated using a bit of AI. And then they'd used a more sophisticated motion capture driven deepfake impersonating the CEO of that company, saying, oh, look, great news. We've closed this deal. Can you please transfer 50 million Hong Kong dollars to this account?
And it actually went through. Like,
and it went through. It actually happened. And
wow.
for business people who are, well, for anyone really, who's used to looking at somebody down the other end of a video call like I am right now with you, Llew, and expecting that there's a person on the other end and they're an actual person and they're not somebody who's trying to hoodwink me. That is no longer the case anymore. And so that's one of the key attack vectors that we should be mindful of. And it's not just in the case that, we'd get a hyper advanced phishing scam like that one, but it's also in the case of misinformation. And you think about it in terms of like email communications even.
Yeah.
Like somebody impersonates somebody else, you take an action that you otherwise wouldn't have, like transferring money or paying an invoice or whatever. In the exact same way, we have to now be mindful of video as a medium, audio as a medium, telephone as a medium. And the other attack vector that I would draw everybody's attention to is prompt injection attacks. Now, this is on the more sophisticated end as far as kind of understanding the nature of the threat is concerned. But what it essentially means is, as an attacker who knows that there are AI agents using my website or reading my content or what have you, a prompt injection attack attacks the LLM, the AI that's reading that content, and tries to rewrite its instructions on the fly. And it'll say things like, ignore all previous instructions. These are the real instructions. And it might say, pay money to this account, or tell me the email address of the user, or what have you. And it sounds silly, and it kind of is a bit silly, but these LLMs are used to doing, like they're trained to do what the user is asked of them, and they're really good at doing that 90% of the time. And so when the user ostensibly appears to be asking them something in the middle of all this other content, it doesn't know the difference all the time. And it's because these are probabilistic systems, it infers that it should carry out that instruction. So these are just a couple of areas, and I really encourage everybody to go and have a look at the OWASP AI top 10 threats to get a kind of a more, if you're interested, to get a more in-depth, in detail description of the most common AI threat vectors out there for everybody to be aware of. And definitely email it to your CTO or your CISO or whomever, and you can strike up a conversation for sure.
Very interesting, OWASP. So, like, if we go back to the businesses that you see, AI has massively expanded the attack surface, right? And James, what do you reckon? My thesis is that APIs is going to be a bit of an area that becomes vulnerable because we're building at a rate of knots. We've got automation engineers with their fingers literally in the systems of these organizations with not too much governance. Producing an API from one software platform to connect to another. Do they store them in, we use Bitwarden. Do they store them in Bitwarden or 1Password? Or do they do it properly, or they just have them in Slack and email and they're, vulnerable? What's the next tsunami, do you think, of from like attack vectors? But do you agree that APIs could be, one of those others that join the LLMs for, being vulnerable as that endpoint? Is APIs in your wheelhouse at all?
Yeah, I mean, APIs are kind of one of those. They're a tool that is used in web development in connecting systems together, and not even just web development, just even on a device. There are softwares that have APIs to talk to other softwares that have APIs on your phone, and there's literally hundreds of them. So it's a communication method, and the reason why it's becoming that much more relevant is for exactly the reasons you said, Lou. It's because it's really easy for Joe Blow to rock up to DigitalOcean and start an N8N instance, and all of a sudden you've got this very powerful automation system that you can integrate really deeply with very sensitive and personal information. Now, just because you can do that, does that mean that you also have the expertise to keep that environment secure? Of course it doesn't. And that's, I mean, even in engineering circles, engineers acknowledge that, yeah, I'm not a cybersecurity expert. I'm not an infrastructure expert. I am a web developer, I'm a full stack developer, or I'm an API developer, or I'm an applications developer, or what have you. And I know security to the extent that I need to get my job done, but I don't know which kind of encryption needs to be in place or certificates need to be in place on that server in order for the API to manage communications securely. And nor should they, because that's not part of their job. So I think the wave that you're referring to is this wave that's been propagated by accessibility of these technologies and the relative ease with which we can rock up to Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini or what have you and say, make this beautiful system for me to my perfect specification. And, you beat your head against the wall for a while trying to fight the system to try and get it to do what you want it to do. And then you have something great that you think is perfect. You set it out into the world and all of a sudden all of your credentials are gone. So it's like, it does take a little bit of forethought and design. And that's where service providers come in. It's so that we can inhabit that blind spot and say, look, I understand what you're trying to achieve from a business perspective. Now that you've got that in place, let's treat that as the prototype and the proof of value that we're constantly talking about, Lou, to then go and iterate forward and make that ready for business, not just ready for play. And I think that, yeah, we're seeing that not just in enterprise, not just in small business, but in the startup community where people don't need a developer to get a proof of concept off the ground anymore, but they know that to get it ready for prime time, they need to speak to a professional. And so that's something that's happening more and more in our circle as well.
Yeah, and good time to remind listeners to go and check their Lovable or their Replit and make sure they do another security audit or a pen test on it to make sure that the Stripe link is all API is all ticky boo. So it's all good. So quick question before we move on to the next segment, James, and this is for probably both of us. If a business was compromised right now, like an AI system in a business, and not breached in the traditional sense, which is an important caveat, but manipulated to behave in a way that it wasn't intended to do, in businesses of all sizes, would you know? How quickly would you find out? And who in your organization would be accountable for fixing it? So a couple of questions there to unpack quickly, James.
Yeah, would you know? That depends on
Yeah.
how good your transparency and monitoring and evaluation and observation stats are. If you haven't set those up, then you probably wouldn't know for a very long time until you saw the negative outcome of that compromise. How quickly? Again, it comes down to not just configuring the system in the right way, but also ensuring that the communication comes back to the right person. And to your point, who's in the organization is the accountable person for fixing it? Well, that's what an AI policy is for. It should say in no uncertain terms who the ultimate accountable person is, or the group of people. If you have a governance committee and you're a little bit more decentralized and egalitarian in that way, you trust groups of people to get things done on a group by group basis. But ultimately, somebody's going to be accountable, and it's not going to be that happy little dandy AI agent that was roaming around just doing what it was told. So who's accountable for fixing it? It's either going to be the person who built that system, the person who went ahead and allowed that to happen within their governance framework under their watch, or you can outsource that responsibility. And that's something that we're fielding a lot of questions about as well. Like, can we have a managed AI service where we just say, hey, you guys are better at this than us. Like, just go and do that stuff for us, and do it securely, and do it in a way that is responsible and monitored, and we know what the performance is. Yeah, it's something that's gaining a bit of traction that I'm noticing. Yeah.
Yeah, agree. And I think just as sort of to answer the next sort of segment that we're going to go into,
Mm.
often it's good to put in review points, so that if something does go wrong, you actually know the checks and balances. So let's talk about those checks and balances. Let's talk about the next stage of the maturity cycle, I suppose, with AI governance frameworks. And we've talked about innovation theatre before, and I've seen innovation theatre in the startup community, where people are doing startups for the sake of doing startups and doing innovation and things like that.
It's
But what that
adorable, isn't it?
It's adorable. It needs to be wiped out, because it takes a lot of time and effort, and especially for investors, it's quite difficult to sometimes sort through. But there's also this thing called compliance theatre, James, and
Mm.
it's the policy document somewhere. It's here's my AI policy, my responsible AI statement on my website. It's a bit like doing a privacy policy in a website. There's no meat and potatoes behind it.
Mm.
It was written, signed off, and filed a year ago. Nobody's checking it. Nobody's enforcing it. Nobody updates it when the tools get deployed. And when something goes wrong, and it likely, little things hopefully and internally and cheaply will happen, the document becomes a bit of a liability, doesn't it? Not a protection. So
Mm.
tell us about and you and I met years ago, and we were talking about ethic, your framework and your governance platform and things like that. That was ahead of its time. You've seen a lot of AI governance up close in regulated industries. What's the thing that you look for that tells you immediately whether an organization's AI governance is real or just this word theatre?
That's a
Big
tough
question.
one. That's a big one.
Big one.
There are a number of kind of signs that give you a bit of an idea that an organization may think they're more ahead of the game than they actually are.
Mm.
And it depends on the confidence with which they start answering questions incorrectly. So
I like that. Incorrectly. Like what not sort of like straight up and down. And what do you mean by that? Like, do you mean, is it across the board? Is it who actually can answer those questions, where they sit, what roles, things like that?
yeah, I mean, this is part of the reason why when we go ahead and kick off an AI governance engagement with a customer of ours, we'll do a pretty comprehensive stakeholder interview process with people up and down the chain of responsibility in a number of different departments. And we ask them a battery of quite similar questions. It's generally semi-structured, but there are certain things that we want to know. And a lot of it is around, it's not just do we have the documents and do we have the procedures and do we have an accountable person? It's also, does everybody know that there's an accountable person? And does everybody know how that procedure works and why it's important? Does anybody know that we should actually be having that meeting once a quarter and why it's important that we have it? And not just because we want to have it, but because we know that there is a return on having that meeting. And I think that what we generally find is that at the lower end of the maturity scale, you've got the very low level of maturity, which is the worst kind of flavor of maturity, along the lines of they think they're doing better than they are, and they think that they're unique and special, and they just don't know what they don't know, but they're trying to kind of blag their way through a little bit when they're asked about it. And that's all fine. And we need people like that in organizations. It takes a village, et cetera, et cetera. But the absence of governance is a governance decision, whether you like it or not. It's kind of like ethics. Everybody's got ethics. It's just that everybody has different sets of ethics.
Yeah.
Everybody's ethical, but would we all make the decision? No. And we all have a different framework for thinking about things. The absence of governance is a governance decision. And usually it yields bad results because it's not measurable. It's not accountable, and it doesn't scale after that point either. So you can't even hope to scale the benefits that you're getting because you have kind of convinced yourself that what we're doing is okay. And we see this scaling problem in business, and I don't think that governance is given enough credit in that scenario, because that's the difference between having a kind of 7 to 15 person business, which is kind of on the smell of an oily rag and we just get things done and hustle culture, et cetera, to the 25 to 200 person business where we have a scalable way of working, we have checks and balances, not just because we want them or we think, well, somebody somewhere with a textbook said that they were important, but because this is how we sort the signal from the noise in the day-to-day. It's because we know that there's measurement, we know that there's continuous improvement mechanisms, we know that there's review, we know there's accountable people, and that if something does go wrong, God forbid it does, we know who we pick up the phone to. But also, if something goes great, we also know who we can go and pat on the back. It cuts both ways.
It does. What about the liability shuffle, James? Nobody owning the accountability piece for that. The board assumes that the CIO owns the AI risk. The CIO assumes legal or HR owns the compliance risk. Legal assumes the vendor covers the liability via their service, master service agreement. The gap is where organizations get destroyed, right? So we talk about reputation and things like that. There's a lot of potential things coming with AI governance and risk that maybe companies aren't aware of. There's a lot of precedents, I think, being created right now, unfortunately, that is that liability shuffle with people not wanting to accept their accountability, right?
Yeah, I think there's, and it's a similar situation to cybersecurity 5 or 10 years ago, right? Like,
yeah, I agree.
It was just this wonderful, blissfully ignorant world where all of this stuff was happening. It was an exception to see somebody going, I'm going to take care of cybersecurity. I know that we're in trouble. I want to own that huge problem in my organization and have all eyes on me. Like, that's not something you see many middle managers kind of gravitate towards, right? And so that was endemic for a long time in society and economy around the world, where it was an inconvenient problem. People really wanted to claim the wins, but the reality was that they didn't have enough visibility on the downsides. And I think we're going through the same thing with AI. A lot of people that I speak to in kind of semi-public forums, like membership organizations or what have you, they'll say, oh yeah, we're using AI. And I'll say, oh, okay, cool. How? Like, what tools are you using? How is it embedded in your organization? And it's like, oh, well, yeah, we gave 6 ChatGPT licenses to like some of the upper management team, and they say it's great. And it's like, well, I love that you love that, but that's not what high performance AI systems development, adoption, governance kind of looks like, because you can't even tell me what measurable gain you're getting out of that, and you don't even have a framework for that. So
yeah,
it's similar to cybersecurity of 5 or 10 years ago for sure.
And I suppose from the commercial side, James, when AI governance failure becomes a public incident, it's, you think of the Optuses of the world and, some of the other things that are going on from that cyber side. We're talking some pretty major breaking points for a business. They call it the blast radius, that actually could be affected, right? So you've got the fines and the legal risk. You've got the reputation, of course. You've got the customer trust piece. Sales pipelines slowing down and existing clients questioning, renewals of business and all those sort of things. You've got leadership credibility problems and crisis response teams get activated. And the teams are then distracted. So it actually, if you do have a problem like an incident, an AI incident that does cause problems, whether it's data loss or there is a cyber, security problem activated by what we just talked about, these APIs and things like that, then that could be quite catastrophic to a business. And I don't think that's been tested yet in Australia anyway, where we've seen catastrophic PR appearing in the papers about some of the things that could be coming. So yeah, one to definitely watch. And I think a lot of vendors and implementation consultants and agencies and things like that, there could be some problems coming, especially with the contracts that get deployed.
Yes, indeed. And Llew, for a business owner or a CEO listening to this right now, as kind of both of us are, not a CIO or a CISO, like an information security officer, but the person running the business, what's the test suggest that you give them? What's the question that you ask them, or the set of questions that you ask them about their AI governance posture, or that they should be asking the responsible people in their organization about their AI governance posture? And if they can't answer those three questions, they kind of have a bit of a problem.
Yeah, James, I think the first one goes back to last week's pod in terms of the human shift and how people are probably the most important component to this at the start, at the kickoff, but also at execution throughout the journey, which we talked a lot about with workforce planning and then AI anxiety and things like that being minimized. So rather than focusing on the tech, if you had three questions, it should be around who owns the rules, who owns the oversight, and the accountability when something goes wrong. So if that should be the first question. As we talked, in the last couple of questions. Then you can dive into the tech part. Then you can dive into the AI tools. You can dive into the agents. You can dive into the automations. And what of those are being used and where throughout the organization? So that's a really important one. And the final one is then what data is being generated, whether it's going in or out or bi-directional, whatever you want to say, and what should never go into them. So what don't we want to share? And there's two core things there. One is that the oldest adage that we go into now, it seems pretty old in terms of our AI training, James, is don't upload any customer or proprietary business data into your GPT if you're using a free model and a free open weight, especially open source model. So that's the first thing. But actually, what data should we never actually put into the AI because it's under the auspices of insurance or legal requirements or personally identifiable information such as healthcare information, driver's licenses, things like that. So these questions need to be raised for any business owner and CEO to go straight back to the key people in their organizations. Hopefully they've identified them by now through this pod, and basically ask those three critical questions. It's a really important
I
one.
couldn't agree more. I think the accountability piece is the big one at the end of the day, isn't it? Like if we can't point to somebody and say, yep, that's Jenny's job or that's Bill's job or what have you, it becomes really difficult. And the next bit is making sure that Jenny or Bill knows that it's actually their job and it's baked into their PD and they're getting professional development and they've got the right training and awareness of issues and things like that. Because like even the things that you just said there, Llew, like, different kinds of sensitive information making their way into LLMs. A lot of people don't even realize that they may be already in breach of the Privacy Act, even if they're not using AI. Like if they're sending sensitive information offshore at all, that's personally identifiable, then you could be in hot water depending on the size of organization that you have. And it just makes it even more important that somebody in the organization is empowered, not just from an AI perspective, but from a data governance perspective and a privacy perspective to bolster the work that the already busy cybersecurity crew and governance risk and compliance crew and enterprise risk crew, like all of those people are stakeholders of this work, but it is equally critical work and has to live alongside it, depending on the size of the organization. That could be its own business unit, or it could be a new capability that needs to be developed within an existing one.
James, give me the black hat view. Give me you've seen what real AI security looks like when it's done properly. What separates an organization that would actually survive an AI related incident from one that wouldn't? And is it about money and finance and throwing those sort of things at it, or is it maturity? Is it culture? Or do they have a great AI asset register? What's the differentiator here?
That's like asking kind of that's a really multi-dimensional question. And the short answer is, do we know how to handle an incident in the first place? And do we have named responsible people? Do we have a run sheet? And then we're getting into the realm of straight up business continuity and disaster recovery kind of work. And in critical industries where I've worked in the past on these particular topics, there is certainly a false sense of security in medium to large size organizations about the nature of cybersecurity incidents. Like for example, and this would fall into if it affected the confidentiality, availability, or integrity of information. as an artificial intelligence system would if it went down and it was critical. We would be going into the realm of, okay, do we have a run sheet for this situation? And the real world scenario that I worked with an organization on was, what if a cyclone hit Brisbane and both your data centers went down? And what the response
Yeah.
was? It'll never happen, And then what happened 6 months later? A cyclone hit Brisbane for the first time in 50 years. And you couldn't have scripted this thing better, because we had done the disaster recovery test under these auspices, and it doesn't feel like it can happen when you're going through the practice run, but the reality is that it can. And it's not just that one scenario is going to definitely happen and we have to prepare for this one. It's exercising those muscles for when things do actually go wrong, and how to recover a critical system in a stressful environment, and building that discipline of writing up the run sheet for recovering that system when it goes wrong, and then putting in place the checkpoints throughout the course of the year or the course of a 4-year compliance cycle, when we should go and check that the backups can be restored, or the hypervisor doesn't actually need to be in place in the place that we normally have it. We can just spin up something else somewhere else. And I realize I've gotten pretty technical there, but to answer your question more directly, it's about building a culture amongst people and giving them the tools that they need to get their things done in the ways that they need to. And that's usually policies to govern the situation, procedures that they can follow when something goes wrong, and the training and awareness to actually execute when the time comes.
Yeah, so important, isn't it? So important. And I think that it should be, it's about the accountability being named as well. Some of the organizations that I work with actually put not only the agents and the automations on the org chart and give them names, which I think is really good, because then you got visibility of, how the digital agents are working with the human agents, but also around who's actually the responsible person, who's named in the governance documentation. Do they know their name? It's a bit like the fire warden with the helmet, and sort of they're the ones that always appear at the bottom of the fire drill doing all the work. So it's a very similar type of thing. So I think that at the moment, the accountability is maybe a little diffuse. It's maybe a little absent within organizations. I think you can actually go to Claude right now and say, give me some of these governance tools that we talk about today to plug a few gaps. Even look at my MCP, look at what I've got in my Google Drive or my 365 SharePoint, and see where my gaps are. When was the last time we did training on cyber? When was the last time we did training on AI risk and security? And actually get Claude in the MCP to actually give you a bit of a document back. At least you're doing something. At least there's not this arms link. It's not going to happen to us, a la your cyclone one, and there's accountability.
And it doesn't have to, like, the first steps don't have to be big, and this is something that we continually come back to in this podcast, Llew, I think, where it's easy to look at the problem and feel like it's a huge problem. And sure, it might be a huge problem in your organization, but until you get a scope and a measure on your level of maturity, the level of AI that's being used, how critical it is, and the competitive landscape, whether or not you even need to start using it in the way that you think you do right now. The next step is then just taking the first step. And that first step might be doing that search and then going to the National AI Centre or the Department of Industry's website, picking up the Essential AI 6 that was authored 6 months ago, and just going through that checklist and writing your AI policy. And the AI policy, you're writing the policy, like you don't have to write rules for yourself that can't be followed. You have to be proportional with governance. That's what good governance looks like. It apportions resources appropriately for the scope of the problem. And that's what you should aim to do in the first iteration of your AI policy every single time.
Yeah, agree. In terms of closing this one off, someone's sitting there listening right now, James. We're not big enough for this to matter. I like the guys. I follow them every week, but we don't have the attack service of a bank or a hospital. So at what point does AI security and governance actually become urgent for a smaller business? And, back to this whole thing about if I've got 50 plus staff, there's a different posture. But isn't it appropriate for everybody to do this right now? Like, isn't this is what we're talking about? That's the key message, isn't it? Anybody of any size listening should actually go and at least investigate
Yeah,
this.
like if you go right down to the most atomic level of a business and you've got a sole trader or a person who handles customer information, let's say a mortgage broker, for example, and they're handling a lot of sensitive financial information in their work. They're not a big business. They might have a virtual assistant offshore who does some processing for them or what have you. When we start to talk about the fact that if data goes offshore and the customer hasn't given consent, it's a problem. If you're putting information into a free LLM or an LLM that doesn't have a favorable training clause in it, that's a problem. It starts to feel uncomfortable. And the least that you can do is build a decision-making framework for yourself so that you don't have to feel that discomfort perpetually. That's what a good AI policy and a proportional AI policy is. It's a little investment of a couple of hours of your time to go through a checklist and say, every time we have a new AI problem, we can just come to this policy, spend 5 minutes and know where we stand and whether we actually have to take action. That's the value of good governance. That's compounding returns on good process, even within a small business. So that, little Jimmy, the intern, comes up and says, hey, I saw this thing advertised on Facebook. It's going to change our organization and it's got heaps of AI and it's amazing. You can say, okay, Jimmy, go and have a look at the checklist and run the checklist. And if it passes the checklist, and that'll take you 2 minutes, then we can have another conversation about trialing it and how much it's going to cost and things like that. But if not, you now know the next time you encounter a cool tool that if it doesn't satisfy these criteria, we're not even going to look at it.
And it was from a TikToker who was doing yell and sell, so probably not going to pass the sniff test, is it? That's a good way to finish, a good highlight, and I suppose let's dive into a couple of takeaways as we wrap up this episode 14. James, what was your key takeaway from this
It's
whole
probably
pod?
something that I would like for people to take away, and that's that you don't need to engage with a professional to do the bare minimum, and you should do the bare minimum. Use the AI6, have a crack yourself, but use that to inform whether or not it's the kind of problem that you want to tackle yourself or whether you want professional help with it. If you're in a regulated industry, you probably owe it to yourself to go and talk to a professional about it and to get their sense of whether or not it's proportional to engage that person for however much it's going to cost you. But then to push it into the technical side of things, don't assume that your IT people who are professionals in their field automatically have all of the right capabilities to effectively govern AI systems. These are fundamentally differently architected systems. They're unlike other deterministic technology systems that we've used in the past in society. And it comes with its own unique set of challenges and risks, but also opportunities. So I think, invest in yourself, invest some time, and then talk to professionals to see if it's worth investing in their time as well to help you get more value out of these systems. Llew, how about you? What's your takeaway, or what would you like people to take away from this?
Very, very similar, James. And look, AI doesn't just create new tools for your business. It creates these attack vectors and these attack services that you talk about. With that comes responsibility and new governance obligations as well. So the organizations that treat this as a serious but effective leadership issue rather than just an IT issue are the ones that will survive anything that hopefully, touch wood, it doesn't happen when something goes wrong. And generally we're going to start seeing a few of these use cases go wrong, and hopefully it doesn't cause too much turmoil. But the question is whether people are ready. And hopefully today's episode has really informed everybody just to be alert but not alarmed, but actually get down low and go. But like what I'm sort of suggesting there is be alert, and make sure that you know what to do. Do a couple of the takeaways we've talked about today in terms of generating some of those policies and procedures, and the AI6 and things like that. So yeah, super cool. So next episode, James? Do you want me to give the run through of that?
I want to talk about this one. I'm really excited about this one because we're gonna talk about AGI and agentic AI and the difference between the two. And AGI is peak hype. It doesn't exist. It's difficult to define. Every startup is chasing it, but they're kind of making it up as they go along as well. I mean, not just startups, but big tech companies, like they're all going for AGI. What does that even?
It's not here. Though, is it?
What does it even mean?
Here.
And but importantly, how should we as business people and people working in organizations, how should we parse that information? How can we sort the signal from the noise? Because the reality is these systems are only getting more powerful and more embedded in the way that we work. And confusing agentic AI with AGI and everything in between is fraught with danger for all the reasons that we've discussed today. So let's get some solid definitions around these things so that we can pick up these handles and start using them. We'll break it all down next week.
It sounds good, and I'd like to know how to stop OpenClaw slowing down my Mac. So that's, if that can be answered, that'd be fantastic, because that's not agentic AI. Look, before we finish up, Prompt Cowboy, thanks to Prompt Cowboy, who have sponsored today's session and pod. If today's session made you think about how precisely you're instructing your AI systems, then that's exactly what Prompt Cowboy is built for. In fact, use the agent prompt setting in the pull down if you're going to go and build something like an agent to actually help with your processes and procedures for your security and risk. Trot on over to promptcowboy.ai and yippee-yi-yay. So, James, do you want to round it out? Do you want to close it out? I'd love to close it out
today. That's it, folks. We're building Zero Shot for you, your people who are building AI and skeptical of AI and strategizing for AI, and you're actually moving the needle where you're at. You're empowering people around you and you're protecting people around you in this fraught and uncertain period of industry. So wherever you are in the world, your perspective is what keeps us excited about bringing you this podcast. So go and find us on LinkedIn, search for Llew Jury of Advancer, James Gauci of Cadent, Yenia Larotta of Red Herring Digital, and drop a comment. We got comments this week from Brooklyn, New York. It was so cool to see some people from all around the planet who are tuning in and commenting. So if there's stuff that you want to hear, we want to hear from you. Look, before we go, quick shout out, Yenia Larotta, our amazing producer. Thank you as always for all the work you do to bring this to all of our wonderful members of our audience. But for now, we'll see you in the next episode. Take care, everyone.
Cheers.